The Colosseum is not just a famous ruin, it is the most impressive vestige of Roman imperial ambition, built in stone with a precision that still defies modern engineers. It has survived centuries of wars, earthquakes, looting, and neglect. But before becoming a symbol of eternal Rome, it rose from the ashes of a tragedy. It was shaped by the pride of an emperor and designed to subjugate, both for its beauty and its brutality. On this journey, we will discover the true story behind its construction, purpose, and survival. This is the Colosseum as you have never seen it before. In the year 64 AD, Rome burned. For days, a fire of devastating proportions consumed entire neighborhoods of the city. Of the 14 administrative regions, 10 were affected. Houses, temples, shops, libraries, everything was reduced to ashes. The tragedy was so great that even the public grain stores were burned, putting the capital's food security at risk. And at the center of it all was Nero, the emperor, who no longer enjoyed the favor of the Senate and was quickly accused by the people of having caused the fire. Some accounts, such as those of Tacitus, suggest that he watched from a tower, playing the lyre while Rome disappeared in smoke. Modern historians doubt this theatrical scene, but what came next was even more symbolic. With the city in ruins, Nero saw an opportunity. On the rubble of ancient Rome, he ordered the construction of an unprecedented palace, the Domus Aurea. Gardens stretched over vast areas, with halls decorated in gold and precious stones, artificial fountains that sparkled in the sunlight, grottos that imitated the mysteries of nature, and even an immense artificial lake in the center of the property. It was an imperial playground of unrivaled extravagance. Everything for him, everything built with public money. At the heart of this private empire, he erected a colossal statue of himself, more than 30 meters high, depicting him as the sun god Invictus. The message was clear: Rome belonged to Nero, and his power would shine like the sun over the empire, but history would not forgive him. Less than 5 years later, Nero committed suicide, while the Senate declared him a public enemy, and then chaos ensued. The year 69 would be remembered as the year of the 4 emperors, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian. Upon assuming the throne, Vespasian needed more than military power. He needed legitimacy. He needed to erase Nero's image, rebuild the people's trust, and mark a new beginning for Rome. It was then that he decided to do the unthinkable: demolish part of the Domus Aurea and drain the artificial lake. Instead of the tyrant's luxury, he would build a public amphitheater, an accessible, popular, grandiose monument, dedicated not to a man but to the city itself. The decision was deeply symbolic. The center of Rome ceased to be the playground of a despot and returned to being the heart of Roman civic life. With this, Vespasian laid the first stone of what would become the largest and most emblematic amphitheater in history. To understand the true purpose of the Colosseum, it must be seen not only as stone, but as a message. While the tyrant had centralized everything around himself, Vespasian returned the spotlight to the people. The Colosseum was erected there, in the heart of Rome, on the site where there had once been a lake reserved for the pleasures of one man. Now that space belonged to tens of thousands. Vespasian knew that after years of civil war and political chaos, Rome needed stability, and stability came from popular support. The free games held there, the gladiator fights, the hunts and the mythological spectacles, were not just entertainment. They were part of a silent pact between the state and the population. Bread and circuses in exchange for obedience. Panem et circenses, bread and circuses. Juvenal would coin that expression years later, but it was already being practiced. Vespasian offered the people what they most desired: spectacle and a sense of belonging, and like any good Roman emperor, he signed his work with his own name. The Colosseum was originally named Amphitheatrum Flavium, in honor of the Flavian dynasty he founded, but Vespasian died before seeing his work completed. It was his son Titus who inaugurated the Colosseum in the year 80 AD with 100 days of feasting, games and bloodshed. More than 9,000 animals were sacrificed during that period, and when he died just 2 years later, his younger brother Domitian assumed the throne and took the project even further. Domitian expanded the underground hypogeum, refined the mechanisms of the arena, and further strengthened the link between power and spectacle. With him, the Colosseum became not only a gift to the people but a political machine, fine-tuned to entertain and dominate at the same time. And for all this to work, Rome had to do the impossible: build something the world had never seen before. Before the stands could be erected, before the cries of the crowd could echo through the stone galleries, Rome had to face a monumental challenge: physically erase the traces of Nero. At the center of the ancient Domus Aurea, an immense artificial lake occupied the land where the new amphitheater was to be built, and draining it would not only be a symbolic task, it would be a colossal technical feat. Roman engineers, masters of hydraulics and land leveling, began the process by excavating the lake down to its foundations. They channeled the water with precision, constructed drainage systems to prevent the ground from shifting, leveled the soil carefully, and prepared the base to support one of the heaviest structures of antiquity. It was the first step in transforming a place of personal ostentation into a public monument. The material chosen for the exterior structure was Tiberia travertine, a light-colored, resistant and relatively light limestone, perfect for supporting the weight of the stands. The blocks were cut to standardized sizes, transported by carts for dozens of kilometers, and placed with extreme precision, joined by iron staples and fixed with a mixture of lime and pozzolan. These iron clamps, often secured with molten lead to prevent rusting, helped bind the stones together with remarkable strength. In the internal areas, the secret was in the mixture: Roman bricks, volcanic tuff blocks, and the legendary opus caementesium, Roman concrete, whose formula still amazes engineers today for its durability and its ability to grow stronger when exposed to moisture. This combination made it possible to create lightweight vaults, sturdy corridors, and modular structures that could be built simultaneously, saving time and effort. The construction site was a living organism. It is estimated that thousands of men worked on the project, including slaves, skilled workers, craftsmen, engineers, and architects. Wooden cranes with pulleys, rope scaffolding, bronze levers, and iron tools formed the machinery of construction. To lift massive blocks into place, they used capstans and treadwheel cranes operated by teams of laborers. Everything was meticulously organized, but the true genius lay in the use of modular repetition. The semicircular arches and Roman vaults allowed the weight to be distributed evenly, giving stability to the structure without the need for interior columns, which freed up space and facilitated the flow of the public. The carefully planned network of corridors and stairways meant that even tens of thousands of spectators could enter and exit within minutes. And since everything followed a precise geometric pattern, different teams could work on different sections at the same time, an early example of efficient large-scale project management. What is impressive is the pace. In just 8 years, from 72 to 80 AD, the Colosseum was practically finished. By modern standards, that would already be fast. For ancient Rome, it was almost unbelievable. When Titus celebrated the official inauguration, the amphitheater was already standing, functional, and absolutely monumental. But all that effort was not just to impress engineers. What would come next would show the whole world why Rome had really built this colossal work. Imagine walking through one of the 80 exterior arches of the Colosseum and suddenly finding yourself engulfed by the thunderous echo of tens of thousands of voices rising like a single living force. The air is thick with the smell of hot sand, the tang of sweat and incense, the distant roar of horns and drums, and the almost physical vibration of collective anticipation that seems to hum through the very stones. For any Roman citizen, stepping into this monumental amphitheater was not merely attending a spectacle, it was entering the beating heart of the empire, a living symbol of Rome's glory and power. The vast elliptical arena, measuring about 86 meters in length and 54 in width, was carefully designed for both spectacle and function. Its floor was made of wooden planks covered with a thick layer of fine sand, a feature so integral that the Latin word for sand, arena, gave the arena its name. This sand was not merely decorative, it absorbed the blood of men and beasts alike, and made it easier to rake and clean the surface between shows. Around the oval floor rose a high protective marble wall that separated the killing ground from the ranks of the spectators. This wall was both a physical and psychological barrier, a stark line between the realm of death and the eager eyes that longed to witness it. Hidden beneath the feet of the crowds lay the hypogeum, a subterranean labyrinth of tunnels, holding cells, cages, and ingenious mechanical platforms. From these dim chambers, wild beasts and armored gladiators were hoisted into the sunlight by means of pulleys, winches, and counterweights. Even elaborate scenery, mock forests, miniature temples, or rocky landscapes, could suddenly rise from the bowels of the earth, creating the illusion that nature itself answered the call of Roman spectacle. The timing of these appearances was meticulously planned. Every sudden revelation, every dramatic entrance was a calculated stroke of theater. It is estimated that between 50,000 and 70,000 people could occupy the Colosseum at once, an extraordinary feat of urban planning. The seating plan mirrored the social hierarchy of Rome with unflinching clarity. Senators and the highest magistrates occupied the prestigious rings closest to the arena, where they could feel the spray of sand and blood. Just behind them sat the equestrian order, the wealthy knights, followed by ordinary Roman citizens. Higher still were the freedmen, and at the very top, farthest from the action, the poor and women were confined to the least desirable places. This carefully staged arrangement reinforced the city's caste divisions at every gathering. Even as the masses shared a single spectacle, each person knew exactly where he or she stood in the grand order of the empire. The games themselves were far more than simple entertainment. They served political, religious, moral, and even legal purposes. Public executions carried out before the crowd were not only punishments but also public lessons in the consequences of crime or rebellion. Reenactments of famous battles or mythological dramas celebrated Rome's past and reaffirmed its identity. Distributions of food, gifts, and coins turned the amphitheater into a theater of imperial generosity. All of this was offered without cost to the spectators, ensuring that the people felt both gratitude and awe toward the emperor who provided such wonders. The Colosseum functioned as a carefully calibrated machine of symbolic domination. While the crowds feasted their eyes on blood and spectacle, the state subtly reaffirmed its values and tightened its hold on the people. This was no innocent festival ground. At its core, the Colosseum was an altar of death, a grand stage where violence was transformed into a spectacle so perfectly choreographed that it provoked a kind of collective catharsis. Every element, from the timing of the performances to the smallest sensory detail, was orchestrated to keep the masses enthralled. Each day of games followed a deliberate sequence. At dawn, the amphitheater came alive with the sound of horns and drums as the opening act began. The staged hunts. Professional hunters known as vomitoras faced exotic and often ferocious beasts brought from the farthest reaches of the empire. These were savage encounters, brutal and almost always one-sided. The animals, lions and leopards from Africa, tigers from distant Parthia, bears from the dark forests of Germania, elephants from Numidia, crocodiles from the Nile, and even the occasional rhinoceros or giraffe were living proof of Rome's global reach. Their arrival in the capital was a triumph of imperial logistics. Specialized ships with reinforced cages transported the creatures across seas and rivers, and soldiers escorted them along the final roads to the Eternal City. Ancient historians such as Suetonius record that more than 9,000 animals were slaughtered during the 100 days of festivities that marked the Colosseum's inauguration alone. After the hunts came the executions, which were as much theater as they were punishment. Condemned criminals were forced to play roles in mythological dramas of cruelty and horror. A prisoner might be costumed as Orpheus and torn apart by wild beasts, or cast as Prometheus chained while a vulture feasted on his flesh. Others were crucified, burned alive, torn apart by mechanical devices, or compelled to fight each other in hopeless combat. These grim spectacles were lessons in imperial authority, demonstrations that defiance of Roman law ended only in suffering and death. Then the main attraction entered the gladiators. Not all were slaves or prisoners. Some were volunteers known as auctorati, who enrolled in gladiator schools in exchange for pay, fame, or the possibility of a new beginning. They lived under strict military discipline, trained with the precision of professional soldiers, and followed carefully regulated diets to maintain strength and stamina. Their combat was both a sport and an art, with each fighter belonging to a specific class with its own weapons and tactics. The heavily armed murmillos carried broad shields and short swords. The agile retiari wielded tridents and nets to entangle their foes. The secutores with their smooth helmets were designed as the retiari's natural opponents, and the threses fought with curved blades and small shields, darting in and out with quick slicing attacks. The fights were real and dangerous, but not all ended in death. Many bouts concluded when one combatant surrendered or when the crowd demanded mercy for a popular or valuable fighter. The ultimate verdict could rest with the emperor, who gauged the mood of the spectators through their shouts, gestures, and applause. The familiar image of a thumb turned downward as the signal for death, so beloved of modern films, is far from certain. Ancient sources differ, and scholars still debate what gesture truly sealed a gladiator's fate. To sustain such an immense and complex enterprise, Rome's engineers had to push the limits of contemporary technology. The Colosseum itself measured an astonishing 189 meters in length, 156 in width, and nearly 50 in height, making it the largest amphitheater of the ancient world and capable of holding tens of thousands of spectators in relative comfort and remarkably safety. To allow the enormous crowds to move freely, the designers created a revolutionary circulation system known as the vomitoria. These arched corridors and wide, strategically placed exits enabled tens of thousands of people to enter and leave the amphitheater within minutes, a design principle so efficient that modern stadiums still employ it today. The architecture of the Colosseum reinforced the social message of the games. As spectators climbed higher through the levels, they encountered a carefully planned hierarchy of classical styles. The lowest level, where senators sat in honor, was adorned with massive Doric columns, solid and powerful. Above it, the second level displayed the more elegant Ionic order, fitting for the equestrian class. The third level rose with ornate Corinthian columns, a reflection of the rising middle strata of Roman society. At the very top, the poorest citizens and women found seats behind simple walls and wooden screens, their view limited, but their presence still part of the grand civic ritual. Even the outer facade served as a visual manual of Roman hierarchy and power. Perhaps the most striking feature of all crowned the upper rim of the structure, the valerium. This immense awning, a canopy of heavy fabric stretched on a web of ropes and pulleys, shielded a large portion of the audience from the fierce Mediterranean sun. The sailors of the imperial fleet at Messino, the classis messinenses, were the only men skilled enough to operate it. Accustomed to handling the sails and rigging of great warships, they managed the valerium like the rigging of a colossal vessel, raising and lowering it with practiced precision. From the masts set into the upper walls, the great sheets of fabric billowed outward like the sails of a trireme, casting a cooling shade over the sea of spectators. All of these elements, stone and fabric, noise and scent, worked together in perfect harmony. The deep foundations and concentric support rings distributed weight evenly, allowing the structure to withstand the vibrations of shouting crowds, the tremors of earthquakes, and the relentless test of time. The careful mixture of building materials, travertine for the exterior facades, volcanic tuff for the interior supports, and the extraordinary Roman concrete for the arches and vaults, provided not only strength, but also a resilience that has defied centuries of war, looting and neglect. Within these walls, nothing was left to chance. The spectacle began long before the first drop of blood touched the sand. Organizers planned every sound and scent to heighten the audience's emotions. The inevitable odors of sweat, dust and blood were countered with clouds of incense and perfumes imported from the farthest reaches of the empire. Writers such as Pliny and Martial mention the use of myrrh, nard and aromatic oils to perfume the very air before the games began, turning the amphitheater into a theater not only for the eyes but also for the senses. Music filled every corner of the arena. Musicians stationed at strategic points played drums, horns and flutes to guide the mood of the crowd. Their rhythms marked the entrance of the gladiators, heightened moments of suspense, and underscored the instant of victory or death. It was a living soundtrack, shaping the emotional journey of the spectators as carefully as any modern score. The visual effects were equally breathtaking. The sudden movement of hidden lifts, the glint of sunlight on polished armor, the appearance of animals from beneath the floor, and the sets that turned the arena into forests, deserts, or mythic palaces transformed the Colosseum into a stage of almost supernatural drama. The valerium itself, when extended, filtered the sunlight into shifting patterns of shade and glow, creating an atmosphere of shifting light that heightened the theatricality of every performance. At times the changing light concealed preparations beneath the arena floor, only to reveal them at the perfect dramatic moment. Yet the most powerful instrument of all was the manipulation of expectation. The carefully calculated pauses between events, the tense silence before an execution, the collective breath held when a gladiator fell awaiting the emperor's verdict. These were the moments when the crowd's emotions were most easily swayed. Rome understood the psychology of spectacle, and in the Colosseum it had built the ultimate tool of mass persuasion. This was never mere entertainment, it was politics in its most primal form. By keeping the people thrilled, distracted and gratified, the emperors secured their loyalty. Juvenal would later write in his famous satire X that the populace required only panem e circenses, bread and circuses, to remain obedient. As long as there was food on the tables and blood in the arena, the Roman people would not question the power that ruled them.
Curiously, the name Colosseum does not appear in any original inscription from the time of its construction. For the Romans of the 1st century, that immense arena was known as the amphitheater Flavium, the amphitheater of the Flavian dynasty, and to them the name made perfect sense. It was Vespasian who conceived the project and laid its foundations, and his sons Titus and Domitian, who brought it to completion and refinement. It stood as a monumental signature of the Flavian family, a public declaration of their power and their intention to give something enduring to the Roman people. Yet the name that would echo through the centuries did not come from the amphitheater itself, but from something that stood beside it. A statue of staggering size and ambition. Near the grand entrance to Nero's Domus Aurea, there remained an enormous bronze sculpture known as the Colossus of Nero. Towering over 30 meters in height, it originally depicted the emperor himself as Sol Invictus, the unconquerable sun, cast in brilliant bronze, with features idealized to near divinity. The statue was intended to be seen from a great distance, a reminder to all of Nero's imperial authority and supposed godlike presence. After Nero's death and the violent end of his reign, the statue underwent a kind of political purification. Vespasian, wary of both the cost and the symbolic chaos of destroying such a colossal work, chose a subtler path. He ordered the figure altered, its features softened, its identity transferred to the sun god. In this way, the grandeur of the sculpture was preserved while the memory of the tyrant was carefully effaced. But the people, ever stubborn in their memory, continued to call it the Colossus. And because the great amphitheater rose beside this giant figure, it soon became natural to speak of the amphitheater of the Colossus, the Colosseum. Only centuries later, in the High Middle Ages, did the name first appear in writing. By the 7th century, the English monk Bede the Venerable recorded a phrase that would acquire a near-prophetic weight. As long as the Colosseum exists, Rome will exist. When the Colosseum falls, Rome will fall, and when Rome falls, the world will end. Over time, the original name faded into obscurity, and the popular nickname became the only name. The statue itself eventually disappeared, most likely melted down for other uses or lost to the slow erosion of time, but its legacy endured in the single word that crossed millennia. When the Western Roman Empire finally collapsed in 476 AD, the Colosseum had already begun to lose its original purpose. Gladiatorial games, long the centerpiece of Roman popular entertainment, had been officially banned decades earlier, around 404 AD under the Emperor Honorius. Growing Christian influence and a new moral sensibility condemned the bloody spectacles as relics of a pagan world. Without the roar of the crowds and the glamour of the contests, the amphitheater entered a new and unexpected phase of life. During the Middle Ages, the great monument became anything but a theater of public games. At first it served as a military fortress. Noble families such as the Frangipani occupied its upper galleries, reinforcing the entrances and raising internal walls to transform it into a stronghold. Later, when the needs of the city changed, the Colosseum's vast spaces were turned to more humble uses. Its arcades became shelters for the homeless, workshops for craftsmen, and stables for animals. Whole sections were even transformed into a kind of residential village, while the parts that could not be inhabited were plundered for building material. Travertine blocks that had once echoed with the cries of the crowd were pried out and carried away to be reborn in other structures. Churches, palaces, and even the walls of St. Peter's Basilica bear stones that once formed the mighty amphitheater. The iron clamps that had bound the great blocks together were also stolen, leaving behind the pitted scars that can still be seen today. In 1349, a violent earthquake brought down much of the southern facade, hastening the ruin, yet the Colosseum never vanished entirely. Even in its battered state, it remained a silent emblem of Rome's colossal past, a reminder of an empire's ambition and the endurance of stone. By the 15th century, the ruins began to attract an unexpected kind of attention. Botanists discovered that the Colosseum had become an accidental garden, home to dozens of rare plant species brought centuries earlier by men and animals from every corner of the Roman world. Seeds carried on the fur of exotic beasts, or in the cargo of merchants, had taken root in the crevices of the ancient masonry, creating a miniature reflection of the empire's vast geography. For a time, the amphitheater stood not only as a relic of human achievement, but also as a living catalogue of Roman expansion. In the 17th century, the Catholic Church sought to give the monument a new spiritual meaning. The popes installed a Via Crucis within its walls and proclaimed it a site of Christian martyrdom, although most historians doubt that many early Christians were actually executed there. The association took hold in popular imagination. The papacy forbade the removal of stones and began the first cautious efforts to preserve the ancient structure. It was in the 19th century, during the Risorgimento and the unification of Italy, that the Colosseum regained a new kind of symbolic power. No longer just a relic of imperial Rome, it became an emblem of national identity, a monument to the continuity of Italian culture. Archaeological excavations and systematic restorations were launched. Engineers stabilized the walls, scholars documented its history, and the Colosseum slowly emerged from centuries of neglect to claim its place as a treasure of the modern world. Today the Colosseum welcomes millions of visitors every year. It has endured not because it is indestructible, but because each generation has found a new meaning in its presence. Once an arena of death and spectacle, later a plundered ruin, and now a protected World Heritage Site, it has become living proof that history can indeed be carved in stone. The mixture of materials that made such longevity possible was a masterpiece of Roman engineering. Builders combined bricks, blocks of volcanic tuff, and the legendary opus cementitium, Roman concrete, whose composition still astonishes modern engineers with its strength and durability. This blend allowed the creation of light yet solid vaults, strong corridors, and modular structures that could be constructed simultaneously, greatly accelerating the work. The construction site itself functioned as a vast and carefully coordinated organism. Thousands of men labored there, among them slaves, skilled artisans, engineers, and architects. Wooden cranes, equipped with pulleys, rope scaffolding that could be moved and adjusted, bronze levers, and iron tools formed the machinery of construction. Organization was meticulous, but the true brilliance lay in the principle of modular repetition. The semicircular arches and the system of Roman vaults distributed weight so evenly that no internal columns were needed, leaving broad open spaces and allowing crowds to flow with ease. Because every section followed a precise geometric plan, different teams could work simultaneously on separate parts of the structure. The speed of the undertaking remains astonishing. In only 8 years, from 72 to 80 AD, the Colosseum rose from the drained basin of Nero's artificial lake to its full monumental form. Even by the standards of modern construction, such a pace would be impressive. For ancient Rome, it was almost beyond belief. When Titus presided over the grand inauguration, the amphitheater stood complete, functional, and awe-inspiring. Yet all this effort was not intended merely to dazzle engineers. What followed would reveal to the entire world the true reason Rome had built this colossal work. Imagine walking through one of the 80 exterior arches of the Colosseum and suddenly finding yourself surrounded by tens of thousands of voices. The smell of hot sand mingles with the roar of instruments and the almost physical vibration of collective anticipation. For any Roman citizen, that moment was more than a simple visit to the amphitheater. It was an immersion into the very heartbeat of the empire. The great elliptical arena, about 86 meters long and 54 meters wide, was covered with sturdy wooden planks and topped with a thick layer of fine sand, the same sand that would give rise to the word arena. This layer was essential, absorbing the blood of beasts and gladiators and allowing the surface to be raked clean between shows. Around the arena rose a high marble wall, a literal and symbolic barrier that separated the spectacle of death from the thousands of eager eyes that longed to witness it. Beneath the feet of the spectators stretched the hypogeum, an underground maze of tunnels, cages, platforms, and manually operated elevators. From this hidden world, wild animals, armed gladiators, and even elaborate stage sets were suddenly raised by means of pulleys and counterweights, appearing in the center of the arena as if emerging from the very bowels of the earth. Every movement was timed and controlled, every effect designed to heighten the spectacle. It is estimated that between 50,000 and 70,000 people could occupy the Colosseum at the same time. The seating arrangement was anything but random. It was a carefully executed reflection of Rome's rigid social hierarchy, a demonstration of order carved in stone. Senators occupied the prestigious front rows, followed by the knights of the equestrian class, then the common citizens and freedmen. At the top, Furthest from the arena and the action sat the women and the poorest of the populace, a living testament to the stratified society that gathered beneath the Roman sun.
This visual organization reinforced the idea that Rome functioned as a caste society in the most visible and undeniable way, reminding every spectator of their own place in the rigid hierarchy of the empire. By attending the same show and sitting in their prescribed section, each person was constantly and publicly aware of their social standing. Even the simple act of finding one's seat became a subtle reaffirmation of the Roman order. But the games that filled the arena were never merely entertainment. They carried political weight, religious symbolism, moral lessons, and even legal functions. To execute criminals before the eyes of tens of thousands was not only a form of punishment, but also an unmistakable public warning. Each death was a performance meant to instruct and to intimidate. The spectacles often recreated myths or reenacted famous battles, turning bloodshed into a grand retelling of Rome's own identity and its claims to divine favor. At the same time, emperors distributed food, gifts, and coins among the audience, gestures of generosity that also reminded the crowd of the boundless power and wealth of the imperial household. And all of this was free to the spectators, a calculated gift to keep loyalty and admiration firmly directed toward the state. The Colosseum functioned as a perfect machine of symbolic domination. While the people were fed and entertained, the state embedded its values into their minds and reinforced the absolute authority of the empire. It was not built for innocent celebration or mere amusement. At its core, it was an altar of death, a choreographed engine of spectacle designed to transform violence into a collective ritual. Everything that took place there was meticulously rehearsed, timed to perfection, and staged to provoke a shared catharsis that bound the spectators together in awe and obedience. The shows followed a carefully arranged sequence. At dawn, the day's entertainment opened with staged hunts known as venationas, in which professional hunters, the venators, faced exotic beasts brought from the farthest reaches of the Roman world. These were savage and bloody confrontations, often absurdly unequal and deliberately designed to shock and thrill. The animals themselves came from every corner of the empire: lions and leopards from the plains and deserts of Africa, tigers from the distant lands of Parthia, bears from the deep forests of Germania, elephants from the North African territories of Numidia, crocodiles from the Nile, and even rhinos and giraffes, whose very presence in Rome testified to the global reach of imperial power. Transporting such creatures was a monumental logistical achievement. Specially built ships with reinforced cages carried them across the seas, guarded by soldiers to ensure that these living symbols of terror and wonder arrived alive and ready for the spectacle. The historian Suetonius recounts that during the inaugural celebrations of the Colosseum alone, more than 9,000 animals were killed in 100 days of uninterrupted festivities, a staggering display of wealth and cruelty. After the hunts came the executions, which were themselves a form of theater. The condemned were not merely put to death, they became unwilling actors in grim tableaux that combined myth with sadistic creativity. A prisoner might be dressed as Orpheus and then torn apart by wild animals, or forced to play the role of Prometheus and be symbolically devoured by a vulture. Others were crucified, burned alive, torn apart by ingenious machines, or compelled to fight one another with weapons until death decided the outcome. These punishments were both spectacle and instruction, part of the empire's grim pedagogy, a vivid demonstration that defiance of Roman law and authority led inevitably to destruction. Only after these dark spectacles did the gladiators enter the arena, the most celebrated performers of all. Not all of them were slaves. Some were volunteers, known as auctorati, who enrolled in gladiator schools in return for money, the promise of fame, or the hope of a new beginning. Their lives were bound by military discipline. They trained rigorously under expert instructors, followed carefully controlled diets to maintain their strength, and received medical care that in some respects rivaled the best practices of their time. Each gladiator belonged to a particular category with distinctive weapons, armor, and tactics. The murmillows fought with wide shields and short swords, relying on steady, disciplined strikes. The agile retiari carried only a trident and a net, using speed and cunning to entangle their opponents. The heavily armored secutores were designed specifically to counter the retiari, their smooth helmets preventing the net from catching. The Thraces or Thracians wielded curved blades and carried small shields, favoring quick, slicing attacks. The combats were real and dangerous, but they were not always fought to the death. Many contests ended in surrender or in the granting of mercy, especially when a gladiator was popular with the crowd or considered too valuable to lose. The final decision could rest in the hands of the emperor himself, who watched the match and interpreted the cries, gestures, and applause of the spectators before declaring life or death. Contrary to the common image popularized by modern films, historians still debate the actual gesture that signaled a gladiator's fate. The famous thumbs down sign is far from certain and remains a subject of scholarly dispute. Behind the violence and spectacle lay an astonishing feat of engineering, for Rome had to innovate constantly to keep such a vast machine functioning. The amphitheater measured approximately 189 meters in length, 156 meters in width, and almost 50 meters in height, capable of accommodating up to 70,000 people in relative comfort and, more importantly, in remarkable safety. To achieve this, Roman engineers devised an ingenious circulation system known as the vomitoria, arched corridors with wide, strategically placed exits that allowed tens of thousands of spectators to enter and leave in a matter of minutes. This principle of rapid crowd movement proved so effective that it remains the model for modern sports stadiums across the world. As the audience ascended through the Colosseum's levels, they encountered more than mere seating. The architecture itself conveyed a message. Each level displayed a different order of classical columns, visually reflecting the social hierarchy of the spectators. On the first floor, sturdy Doric columns mirrored the solid authority of the senators who sat closest to the action. The second floor bore Ionic columns, more slender and elegant, fitting the equestrian knights. The third floor displayed the refined and ornate Corinthian order, representing the middle classes who occupied the higher seats. And on the top level, the simplest form of architecture, plain arches with boarded windows, was reserved for the women and the poor. The facade of the amphitheater was thus a stone textbook of imperial society, a carefully constructed image of Rome's layered order. Perhaps the most extraordinary feature of all was the great valerium, the immense awning that could be unfurled above a large part of the audience to shield them from the blazing summer sun. Imagine a canopy of heavy fabric and thick ropes stretching like the sails of a vast ship across the upper tiers of the arena. Operating this immense structure required a unique skill set, and so the task fell to the sailors of the classis Missinensis, the imperial fleet based at Misano. Masters of sails, masts and knots, these men now applied their naval expertise not to warfare but to the comfort of the Roman people. From the tops of tall masts set into the amphitheater's upper ring, they hauled and adjusted the ropes and fabric, as if maneuvering the rigging of a trireme on the high seas. The most remarkable aspect of this system was its harmony. The structure bore the stress of wind and the vibrations of tens of thousands of spectators without collapse. Deep foundations and concentric rings of support distributed the colossal weight with precision. The mixture of materials, travertine for the external walls, volcanic tuff for the inner structures, and Roman concrete for the arches and vaults provided both strength and a surprising degree of flexibility. It was this clever combination that enabled the Colosseum to endure centuries of earthquakes, wars, and long periods of neglect.
In this great amphitheater nothing was left to chance. The spectacle began long before blood touched the sand. Every detail, every sound, every scent was orchestrated to capture the audience's attention and manipulate their emotions. As soon as the Roman citizen entered, he was enveloped by an atmosphere designed to stimulate all the senses. The smells of sweat, dust and fresh blood were unavoidable, but even these were carefully counterbalanced. To soften the odors of death and exertion, the organizers scattered incense and perfumes, burning aromatic resins and releasing essences imported from the farthest provinces of the empire. Myrrh and nard, along with other precious oils, were commonly used, a practice noted by writers such as Pliny and Martial, who described the very air of the arena as being perfumed before the games began, a final touch in the careful choreography of spectacle and power.
Sounds, meanwhile, filled every corner of the arenas and helped turn the entire spectacle into an overwhelming sensory experience. Musicians were carefully positioned at strategic points around the amphitheater, equipped with a variety of instruments such as deep-sounding drums, piercing horns, and shrill flutes. Their task went far beyond providing mere background music. They were responsible for shaping the very rhythm of the games, for guiding the emotions of tens of thousands of spectators, as if they were all part of a single living organism. Like a carefully composed soundtrack, their music announced the grand entrance of the gladiators, intensified moments of dramatic tension, and marked both victories and deaths. The changing cadences of their instruments could swell like an approaching storm when a fight reached its climax, or fall into an ominous hush when a condemned criminal awaited the final blow. For the audience, the music was not an ornament or afterthought. It was an essential part of the emotional immersion that made the games unforgettable. The visual dimension of the games was no less deliberate or spectacular. Beneath the arena floor, hidden lifts and complex pulleys groaned and creaked, their movements timed to release animals or scenery at the exact dramatic moment. The sudden glint of polished armor catching the midday sun, the shock of wild animals leaping seemingly from nowhere, and the shifting sets that transformed the sandy arena into jungles, deserts, or grand mythological temples, created an experience that blurred the line between theater and reality. Many games incorporated performances that featured elaborately painted backdrops, intricate stage sets, and moving elements worthy of the finest drama. The Colosseum became an epic theater stage, but one where the actors were often real combatants, and the corpses on the ground were not illusions but actual victims of the spectacle. The enormous valerium, when unfurled high above, contributed not only to the comfort of the audience by providing shade, but also to the atmosphere of the spectacle itself. This colossal awning of heavy fabrics and thick ropes filtered the harsh Roman sunlight, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow that added to the theatricality of the games. At certain times of day, the movement of the sun, combined with the angled fabric of the valerium to cast dramatic penumbra across the arena floor, at once concealing the hidden preparations below and highlighting the combatants at the very moment when the crowd's attention was most intense. The manipulation of natural light became an unspoken part of the performance, a silent collaborator in the drama. Yet perhaps the most powerful element of all was not any single sound or sight, but the careful orchestration of expectation. The Roman organizers understood that suspense itself was a weapon of control. The calculated waiting time between fights, the sudden hush that fell before an execution, and the collective intake of breath when a gladiator stumbled and the crowd turned to the emperor for judgment. All these moments of silence and anticipation were as significant as the violence itself. Rome had mastered the art of manipulating the masses, and the Colosseum was the empire's most formidable instrument for doing so. This manipulation was never only about amusement. It was a political strategy, a way of keeping the people busy, entertained, and distracted from the realities of power. As the satirist Juvenal observed in his famous Satire X, it was enough to offer bread and circuses to guarantee obedience. As long as the citizens had meat on their tables and blood to watch in the arena, few were inclined to question authority or challenge the emperor's rule. Interestingly, the name Colosseum does not appear in any original inscription from the period of its construction. For the Romans of the 1st century, this enormous building was known simply as the Amphitheatrum Flavium, the amphitheater of the Flavian dynasty. That name made perfect sense at the time, for it was the Emperor Vespasian who initiated the project and his sons Titus and Domitian who completed and perfected it. The amphitheater was conceived as a monument to the imperial family, a signature of Flavian power written on a truly colossal scale. Ironically, the name that would endure through the centuries came not from the structure itself but from a statue. Close to the amphitheater, where the monumental entrance to Nero's opulent Domus Aurea once stood, there remained a gigantic bronze sculpture, the Colossus of Nero. This statue, which towered more than 30 meters high, originally depicted Nero himself in the guise of Sol Invictus, the unconquerable sun god. With its radiant crown and heroic stance, it was designed to be visible from a great distance, a constant reminder of imperial authority and divine pretension. After Nero's death, the statue underwent a kind of political purification. Vespasian did not destroy the work, whether from lack of resources or from a shrewder instinct to reuse its grandeur. Instead, he ordered that its features be altered and its dedication changed to honor the sun god. This careful rededication erased the tyrant's memory while preserving the imposing monument. Yet among the people the name lingered. They continued to call it the Colossus, and over time the immense amphitheater beside it became known colloquially as the Amphitheater of the Colossus, eventually shortened to Colosseum. Centuries later, in the High Middle Ages, the name finally appeared in writing. By the 7th century, the English monk Benedict the Venerable recorded a phrase that would resonate for generations: "As long as the Colosseum exists, Rome will exist. When the Colosseum falls, Rome will fall, and when Rome falls, the world will end." Over time, the original Flavian name faded into obscurity, and Colosseum became not just a nickname but the very identity of the monument. The great statue itself eventually disappeared, likely dismantled for its valuable metal, melted down and forgotten. Yet its legacy endures, preserved in the name that has spanned nearly 2 millennia. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476 AD, the Colosseum had already begun to lose its original purpose. Gladiatorial games, increasingly criticized on moral and religious grounds, were banned decades earlier, around 404 AD under Emperor Honorius. With the rise of Christianity, public opinion turned against the bloody spectacles, which came to be regarded as remnants of a pagan world in decline. Bereft of its original function and the roar of the crowds, the Colosseum entered a new and varied existence during the Middle Ages. It became a military fortress, its upper galleries fortified by powerful noble families such as the Frangipani, who reinforced the entrances and built internal walls to secure their holdings. In the centuries that followed, it was repurposed again and again. The great stone structure became a shelter for the homeless, a warehouse for merchants, a collection of workshops, and even a stable for animals. Parts of it were transformed into a residential village. What could not be inhabited or used was methodically dismantled. Massive blocks of travertine were cut out and reused in other building projects across the city. The legacy of that plundering still remains visible. Churches, palaces, and even the mighty St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican contains stones once quarried from the very bleachers where Romans had once screamed for blood. The iron clamps that once held the great blocks together were likewise torn out, leaving the pockmarked holes that can still be seen in the walls today. A devastating earthquake in 1349 destroyed much of the southern facade, further accelerating the ruin.
Yet the Colosseum never vanished entirely. Even in its damaged state, it remained a haunting and immovable presence, a silent reminder of a civilization's grandeur and its appetite for spectacle. In the 15th century, a new and unexpected chapter unfolded. Botanists began to take an interest in the ruins and discovered that dozens of rare plant species had taken root in the cracks and crevices. These plants, seeds of which had been carried to Rome centuries earlier by animals and travelers from every corner of the empire, turned the Colosseum into an accidental botanical garden, a living testament to the biodiversity Rome had once drawn into its orbit. During the 17th century, the Catholic Church sought to redefine the amphitheater's meaning. Popes installed a via crucis within the ancient structure and proclaimed it a site of Christian martyrdom, although most historians today question the accuracy of that direct association. At the same time, the Church prohibited further removal of stone and introduced the first serious measures aimed at preservation. By the 19th century, during the Risorgimento and the unification of Italy, the Colosseum acquired yet another layer of significance. No longer simply a monument of imperial Rome, it became a powerful emblem of Italian national identity. Restoration campaigns, archaeological excavations, and structural consolidations began to rescue the building that earlier generations had neglected or dismantled. The Colosseum was slowly reclaimed as a shared heritage of the modern nation. Today, the Colosseum welcomes millions of visitors every year. It has endured not because it is immune to destruction, but because each generation has found new meanings in its stones. From an arena of death to a symbol of civilization, from a plundered ruin to a World Heritage Site, the Colosseum remains one of the clearest examples of how history can be carved in stone and yet remain alive. And now, I want to hear from you. Which part of the Colosseum's history surprised you the most? Leave it in the comments. I'd love to know what made the biggest impression on you. If you liked this video, subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Turn on the bell and share this video with anyone else who loves history. And as always, may Mars guide you in battle.